Hello, welcome back. Thanks for joining us for part 2 of this week's Talking Europe. Our guest today is one of the youngest high-profile members of the European Parliament, but one with some of the biggest responsibilities too, and who has already faced some rather harsh personal and public attacks. Ska Keller is the co-president of the Greens group in the European Parliament, representing some 51 often very outspoken Green MEPs. Thank you very much for being our guest on France 24.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's great to meet you at this time when there's lots of news about lots of environmental issues. I'd like first, though, just to talk about the group itself. A lot of people hear Green Party and think along the lines of tree huggers or hippies or something like that. Tell us in your own words, what is the Greens group about?
Well, we obviously love trees, that's certainly true, so we will do a lot for environmental and nature protection against climate change, but that's not the only topic we're working on. Social justice is very much at our heart, as much as solidarity in the world, development politics, for example. So we have the big, broad picture, we have opinions on everything, but the idea of ecology and how to make the world a better place for everyone, that's certainly at our core.
OK, well, as I said, there have been some big environmental headlines regarding Europe recently. Now, the Commission in January, I think it was, talked about cracking down on air pollution offenders. 9 member states got warnings over their air quality. Even the Commissioner himself, Carmen Uvela, bemoaned the fact that deadlines for improvements had long since passed. Now, do you see this news story as good in that the Commission is cracking down and taking some action, or perhaps a sign that things are just very sluggish and move slowly? We've got these long timelines, deadlines can pass, and then there's some action.
It's totally true that the air pollution has been a problem for many years, and it should have been tackled already a long time ago, but still it's very good that the Commission is saying enough is enough, you really need to act. And I mean, Germany, as being one of the countries that was invited for that hearing, that certainly brought a lot of headlines in the German news, and this is a really big topic. So many people are dying every year from air pollution. It's really one of the big problems that we have, and we need to get serious about it. It's not a problem that, you know, is nice to have. No, it's really a must.
But it is a problem at the same time. Like you say, people are very concerned about their health, their children's health. At the same time, we have these lifestyles. We're here in Brussels where people have so many cars, there are lots of traffic jams, and it's very hard for people to change their lifestyle without somebody, you know, out there, the authorities, changing their policies about how we live as well. I mean, is that something where you see that Europe directly can have an impact on that level of this problem?
The European Union has to make sure that all its citizens have a clean air to breathe. I mean, that should be the absolute minimum. But of course, a lot of policies at the member state currently influence our lifestyles very much. I mean, you mentioned the problem in Belgium, which is due to the state giving subsidies for a company's car. So really everyone has a car, even if you don't need one. So in that sense, it's the policy that currently makes a bad decision worthwhile. And it should be the other way around. An authority should encourage, let's say, sustainable behavior that is good for everyone. And that needs to happen. And we need to get really serious about that because, as I said, I mean, there's children out on the streets who are breathing this poison every day. And again, it's mostly rich people. They can sure afford to move to the outskirts, you know, live in a green environment. But those who aren't so socially mobile, they're stuck at the inner cities next to the big streets, and that shouldn't happen.
So you see this as an inequality issue as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the poorer people who definitely suffer most from this.
All right, well, let's take a look at a report that fits in very well with this. Some members of our team have been up to Norway, one of Europe's neighbours, of course, to see how technology might be able to impact on these types of concerns. There's been a big push by the Norwegian government to get the ball rolling with electric cars. Check this out from Anaïs Guerra and Isabelle Romero.
Sub-zero temperatures and batteries don't always mix, but that doesn't stop Norway from being the world leader in electric cars. With demand so high, production in this garage in Tromso can't keep up.
Now, if I can say that if we count 10 people, 6, 7 won't buy electric car. It's a very strong demand about electric car, and in the last years we sold about 100 electric car, and if we had the chance to get more electric car, we could sell very a different number. The number will be higher.
an overwhelming demand driven by a government initiative. In Norway, all electric vehicles are exempt from tax, shaving 20% off the final price.
I think it's not so much people who focus on the environment, if I am honest to you, but the money is the number one, and people also get a better feeling if they drive on electric car.
Kurt bought his first electric car last year. It's an investment he wouldn't have made without support from the government, for financial reasons as well as practical ones.
If it hasn't been because of the Norwegian government, I think it will be much more complicated to own an electrical car, because you see how much I need to change my way of life only to be able to run the car.
Learning how to predict journey times and foreseeing when to charge up the car's battery. At charging points which still aren't quite equipped to deal with the number of electric cars on the roads. It's a lot more effort, but it pays off. Green cars don't pay motorway tolls and parking is free. And the number one advantage is clear when it comes to filling up the tank.
Oh, if I'm going to use my diesel or my gasoline, I need to pay at least it's 154, maybe 350 crowns to my cabin and back again. Now we are talking about a cup of coffee.
There are even free charging points. The whole package is costing the Norwegian state hundreds of millions of euros, a price the 13th biggest oil-producing country is willing to pay to protect the environment. Ironically, the transition towards green cars is financed by oil.
So we are really moving on putting forward zero-emission solutions. But at the same time, you're right, that Norway is a country that has been for the last 40 years been dependent on the income from oil and gas. So we have to start to prepare for a situation where oil and gas will be a much smaller part of our economy.
It's a transition that's still getting into gear. Half of all cars sold here last year were electric, powered by Norway's 100% hydroelectric power stations. Still, though, some ask whether it's money well spent, as electric cars only account for a fraction of all journeys made.
So there we go, a little look at how things are working out in Norway with the push towards electric vehicles. Ska Keller, as we just heard there, this has been financed by Norway's rather substantial oil wealth, and of course it's just one country. Europe is a bloc of still currently 28 states, and the economic situation is rather different. Do you think something like that could work across Europe?
Well, certainly I think that the governments need to put the right incentives, and there's a lot that can be done. Very often there's subsidy schemes for company cars. Why not give them only to electric cars? If there's tax deductions, why not only give them to electric cars? Also, a government needs to make sure that there's enough infrastructure for electric cars, because else it's very difficult to use them. And but of course, the solution to all our problems is not just electric cars. That's really important. We need to invest much more into public transport as well, because that saves a lot of energy and it saves also a lot of space. I think that is something we need to look into very much, and much more than currently.
All right, well, let's come to a slightly different but related issue to do with pollution. Bulgaria currently holds the rotating presidency of the European Council. Now, it wasn't on that list of 9 air pollution offenders I mentioned before, but it does have documented issues with pollution. Our reporters went there just a few months ago to investigate, and they found claims, even from people who work at power stations, that corruption is one of the big blocks to progress. What's your take on this? Because corruption, that's an entirely different problem to solve, isn't it?
Yeah, I think corruption, especially in Bulgaria, is really going through every bit of society, and is a much further issue than just, just mishandling some funds here and there. For example, I've been told that there's problems with the official air quality measuring system, and that people have set up, so to say, an alternative system which is much more reliable, and which shows that in Sofia we have a huge problem with air pollution. You can see it as well when you go. It's really a smog bubble around it. There's the problem of the catalysts being stolen from cars because it's easy to sell the precious metals in them onwards and stuff like this. So this whole area of, black market, not reliable public information and all of that, that is contributing to an impression and of corruption, of misinformation and lacking transparency.
And with Bulgaria holding the rotating presidency, it is in the spotlight. From your point of view as an environmentalist, is this perhaps the moment for Bulgaria to be put on the spot a little bit about these issues?
Absolutely. I mean, the presidency is always a possibility for a country to shine, but also it's the moment when everyone looks at that country. And I think Bulgaria could take the opportunity to say, hey, we're really going to tackle the problem of air pollution, but also of corruption, and be a shining example for the rest of the European Union. Unfortunately, currently the Bulgarian government at least is not doing that, and rather they are just, pushing against everyone and attacking everyone who is having a different opinion, which is a big pity because people in Bulgaria are really hoping for also a change of direction.
Well, just recently, within the last few days, I know that you were in Bulgaria to campaign about protecting a forest there, and you faced some rather violent personal verbal attacks from members of the Prime Minister's own party. If you just briefly tell us what happened, and were you expecting that kind of reaction in Bulgaria?
No, certainly not. I went to Bulgaria together with our local Greens there to support protests against a development in a national park, the Pirin National Park, where the government had proposed a new management plan that would allow further extension, huge extension of development in a national park, which is also Natura 2000 area, thereby protected under EU law. But then the Vice Prime Minister actually issued, together with his party friends, a statement which was a very insulting, very violence-threatening language against me, saying I should be thrown out of the country. And that was rather astonishing because really I've never seen such a thing before. I mean, I travel a lot, not ever had this happen to me in Turkey, for example, or anywhere else, so I was really surprised.
And there's been no official apology from Sofia. The Commission, as I understand it, says it's spoken to you and the Bulgarian authorities and it's satisfied the situation's closed. Are you satisfied that the situation is closed?
The Commission President and also Parliament President have been very, very helpful because I alerted them of the situation. Because imagine, I mean, if this happens to me, Group President, MEP, then what about also the people who are living in Bulgaria who are trying to speak up? And I mean, you don't have to agree with them to say, okay, but they have a right to speak up. So they were very helpful, and there was a statement from the Bulgarian government saying that they don't intend to throw me out, which is nice. But I never received any apology from the Vice Prime Minister, not about the insulting language, not about the claim itself I should be thrown out of the country. So I'm not really as satisfied. And again, I mean, what does it say about a country where, people are going on the street, they protest for something, you don't have to share their point of view, but they have a right to speak up, they have a right to demonstrate, and their arguments should be taken seriously and not just, they can't be thrown out of the country. I mean, this is not a way how to solve a political problem.
It certainly seemed to be a rather unique situation. Now, something that you've been speaking about recently that's not an environmental issue, human rights. I know you've been very interested lately in the plight of journalists in Turkey. Lots of journalists have been arbitrarily detained. As we know, Europe sees itself very much as a defender of human rights. But in terms of Turkey, it's in a rather diplomatically tricky spot, isn't it? Needing to keep Turkey on board, particularly for dealing with the migration crisis. Now, do you think that Europe is handling this situation well at the moment? Because there's certainly a lot of discussion.
I think we're not handling it as we should be. I mean, obviously it's a tricky situation because that's also another country and we have limited possibilities, but I think we're limiting also ourselves. You mentioned the migration policy. I mean, there's this deal between Turkey and the EU member states, which basically give Erdogan control over who comes to Europe and who doesn't. And after this deal was closed, we could see that the member states were really reluctant to criticize what's happening in Turkey. So there was a potential for blackmailing because Erdogan could always say, well, if you criticize me, I'm going to send a lot of refugees over the border. And now also we have the problem that a lot of people need to flee from Turkey, but they also have no possibility to come because the European member states have erected big fences in Bulgaria, for example. So it's really, really difficult for refugees to flee and to get to security. And many people, be it journalists, be it academics, be it civil society activists, I mean, our Green Party chairs have been in jail and are facing a big trial now. So everyone is really under threat in Turkey, and we need to speak up because indeed we are claiming that we stand up for human rights, but that also means we have to do it when it comes to specific action.
Well, another human rights issue, equality issue, the Me Too campaign has had a lot of discussion recently. I know the Greens have been speaking up about this a lot. Terry Reintke called in the European Parliament for specific measures, one of your MEPs. She called for specific measures to combat sexual harassment. What kind of measures would that be, though? Are we talking about legislation? It's very difficult, isn't it, to define what is sexual harassment and what kind of punishments could be useful?
Well, actually, we need to look at two different areas. There's action, we need to do legislation, for example, about gender equality, because it's really important. I mean, sexual harassment is a power issue. So we need to do everything we can to put women and men on an equal footing. But then there's also the perspective of inside the European Parliament. There have been cases of sexual harassment, and there we need to be very strict and, for example, with training, but also with an external evaluation to try and get things as right as we can, because we're not isolated. Where this building is also part of what's happening. So, and we need to combat sexual violence wherever we find it in its very different forms.
All right, well, unfortunately, that is all we have time for in this interview. But thank you so much for talking to us here on Talking Europe. Ska Keller, co-president of the Greens group in the European Parliament. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And that is it for this week's Talking Europe. You can watch all of our episodes once again on our website, of course, if you should like, france24.com. I'll see you again very soon for more European news.